Okay, let's go back to that mystery part A that talks a little bit about static equilibrium as well as the components of force. We solve for this, it does indeed fall. But now, let's assume that the lifter is strong enough to hold the weight in this position at that 40-degree angle. What is the resultant force of the humerus on the ulna? And while we're solving for this, we can keep in mind what is the amount of dislocating force caused by the muscle. So let's start with here. This will give rise to here, but we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, so we'll start here. The resultant force of this right here, the humerus acting on the ulna here. All right, so it was defined that he's going to hold this in a position, so that new force, or that maximum muscle force of 4,400 newtons is going to be a lot higher because the sum of the torques is going to be 0. And going on the end resultant force of the humerus on the ulna, the sum of those forces must equal 0 in order for static equilibrium, which it's been defined. So let's take a look and solve for the new force of the muscle based on what the previous torque was. So let's solve based on the previous torque of the weight, which was 124.854 Newton meters. Remember, that wasn't changed, but now the sum of the torques has to equal 0. Before it equaled -40, or in the direction of the weight. But now it's going to be balanced. So we're going to have a new force. Basically, the torque of the weight is going to now equal the torque exerted by the muscle, so that static equilibrium is achieved. Let's go ahead and do that. So we know that this is 124.854 Newton meters. We don't know this, but we do know the distance, which we can bring down here and divide on this side. So 0.03 meters. Which gives us the new force of the muscle perpendicular, which is 4161.79 newtons. This is perpendicular. We need to know the actual force exerted by the muscle. So to do that, we have this. Now we need to find this 40-degree. It's a little crooked, but this is the force of the muscle. Here's this. And in order to do that, it's simply just the force of the muscle is this right here over sine 40 degrees, which, bringing it down here, the force of the muscle 6474.6 newtons. So it's quite a bit, like 2,000 more newtons of force required to even just hold that 120-pound dumbbell still. Well, what did the question ask? What is the resultant force of the humerus on the ulna? Well, the reason this was important to find out this is because now we need to take the sum of forces to equal 0 to see what the resultant, or I guess the leftover force is, which has to be balanced somehow because it's held statically. And let's go ahead and do that. we have the force in the muscle here, that newly calculated force required to hold that in static equilibrium. Then we have the weight, the original weight. These are just this vector here and this vector here. Okay, this is still 40 degrees. We're looking at now this vector. Luckily, we found everything in one sort of dimension. It's either going to go up or down. We're not dealing with right or left or anything like that. So we need to sum the forces to 0 to know what is left over, right? Because this is a large amount. You're going to have a large amount here. Then you're just going to have a little small amount here caused by the weights. And you're going to have this whole thing left over, but it's held in static equilibrium. It's not moving up or concentrically. So we know that there has to be some sort of counter force to hold this thing steady, and that's going to be this vector here. So quite simply, we have one force going in the positive or up direction. That's this 6474.6 newtons. We have an opposing direction, this one right here, minus 588.6 newtons. This is going to give a sum of 588.6 newtons. Or we can just say that's roughly like 9 kilonewtons right here. Okay, but this is this direction. To oppose this motion, we know that it has to be the opposite sign. If we're talking about magnitude, we can go back and say this is the amount that's left over, or the resultant force of the humerus acting on the ulna.